As an ESL teacher in South Korea, I'm given a curriculum that I must adhere to. This curriculum has been created by the National and Regional Offices of Education to ensure students are meeting expectations and benchmarks in their education. However, these standards are not internationally used and are written entirely in Korean. Interestingly enough, the developers of Common Core Initiative studied other nations, especially the rise of education in Asia, in order to find an effective approach to integrate their new curricula. Therefore, today I'm going to use the Common Core State Standards to discuss a process used by educators to translate standards into lessons. In the United States, 41 states and all but one of their territories have adopted the Common Core State Standards. Many international schools also use these same standards in a bid to create consistent educational standards to set high-quality expectations that all students should master by the end of each grade level. The standards tend to use vernacular that can be a bit confusing. But if we unpack these guidelines, we can establish how we should plan and effectively teach these lessons and use strategies that cover all parts of the standard. The two standards I've chosen for this demonstration focus on English language arts literacy in the 6th grade level. The first standard requires students to establish a context and introduce a narrator and/or characters. Students should be able to organize an event sequence that unfolds naturally and logically. The second standard asks students to use a variety of transition words, phrases, and clauses to convey sequence and signal shifts from one time frame or setting to another. Currently, I teach middle school grades 7 through 9 here in South Korea. However, students can easily forget concepts and ideas they have previously learned, so this could be used as a review at the beginning of the year. In my particular case, I have some lower level students coming into my school in the 7th grade, so I know that this unit would be very necessary for my students to learn, as they've probably never done this in their elementary school studies. This unit could easily take 5 lessons to cover all of the materials in order to help students meet these standards. So, to unpack these standards, the first thing educators must do is consider the big ideas in the standard. These are identified by the nouns in the standard, so you can determine what the students will need to know. So, for this unit, students will be learning about the context of a story such as setting, background, or time period. These details will allow a reader to better understand the events of the plot. Students will also be able to identify the narrator, characters, and sequence of events of the plot, as well as transition words, phrases, and clauses that signal shifts from one time to the next. The next thing you must consider are the skills students must use to meet the standards. The skills can be identified by examining the verbs used in the standard. For this unit, students will establish the context of a story and identify narrator, characters, and sequence of events. Secondly, they must use sequence transition words to organize parts of a story and show the relationship between ideas. Finally, they should demonstrate an understanding of how to logically convey a sequence of events. There are actually a lot of literacy skills here that students must show a mastery in, so this unit should take a few weeks for students to work their way through. Now that we have unpacked this standard, you can then focus on planning some activities that will help to engage students so they can better develop these skills we previously identified. The first activity I chose is a Think, Pair, Share, where students will be asked to choose a character from a book, movie, or TV show that they like. They will then imagine this character attending their own school and describe this character's first day. Students will then pair up and tell their stories to each other. Their partner can then write the order of events using sequence transition words. The next activity is called Order Out of Chaos. Smaller groups of 3 to 4 students will be created. The groups can be divided into homogeneous groups based on ability levels and given a copy of a short story with lexicals that match their reading grade levels. The stories will be pre-cut apart into paragraphs, and groups must then assemble the story considering the logical sequence of events. If all groups are given the same story, they can compare their answers at the end of the activity. If groups have been given different stories, Groups could be asked to read their completed stories out loud while explaining their reasoning for the ordering they chose. The final project can be a transferring text to timelines biography, or vice versa for high-level students needing acceleration. Timelines can be a great way for visual students to see the order of events more clearly. Choosing biographies of famous celebrities or people that interest your students is a good way to make sure your students will be engaged and motivated throughout this project. Finally, you need to consider how you will assess your students' mastery of the standard and how you will monitor their progress throughout the unit. Teachers must always consider each reading grade level of their students when planning assessments. For my lower level students, quizzes that ask students to identify signal and transition words are imperative for them to demonstrate their grasp of key ideas. For visual learners, low-level readers, or special needs students, organizing statements with correlating picture cards will give you an idea of their progress. Accelerated learners will need to be more challenged. Retelling stories in their own words using key terminology, vocabulary, and ideas is a great way to assess their skills while moving students towards a greater expertise. And there you have it. How to unpack a standard for lesson planning and utilizing teaching strategies that address all parts of that standard.